Hello, word hustlers, word warriors, word speed demons, and word wranglers. I'm Grant Faulkner, and I'm here with my co-host, co-founder, co-memoir lover, Brooke Warner. And Brooke, we've got a treat today. Today, we're kicking off a special series of this podcast, our JanYourStory Prep series, because each episode is going to be focused on helping people write 500 words each day in the month of January to either start their memoir or kickstart it, and then, hopefully create the momentum to keep writing it the rest of the year.
Yes, I am super excited to create some momentum for my memoir, which I have been saying since the first time I said it. And I really liked the analogy. I know you did too, Grant, that it's underwatered.
Yeah.
It's still feeling that way, but January has got some downpour coming, which is great. It's under momentumed as well. So I'm signed up, everybody. Just to say, come to JanYourStory. I do want to pause for a moment to tell you how to sign up, because if you have not heard us talking about it, it's coming. It's very, very much upon us. So do go to our website, memoirnation.com, check out the tab on the menu, which is called JanYourStory, and it will guide you on how to sign up for our Memoir Nation community. And that is where you join us for this writing event that is totally free. You do have to sign up. So there is that. But once you're in there, there is a community. There are lots of people in there. There's a lot of activity. And there is the important part, which is RSVPing for JanYourStory so that you get all the updates. And as Grant said, you do not have to start a memoir from scratch, although if that's what you want to do, great. If you want to just come and work on anything, you're welcome to do that. If you're already working on a memoir, then you just keep writing it. So really what JanYourStory is a place to just come, be in community with other people who are committing to write 500 words a day for the entire month of January. And if you're writing in another genre, you are invited. Really, this is just a writing challenge, and we want it to be fun. We don't want there to be any hard rules. If you call it a memoir, we call it a memoir. If you don't, you're still welcome. So Grant, I'm excited, and I know you are too.
Yeah. We just want people to show up to write. And by showing up, you create creative momentum. And as you know, Brooke, I'm very focused on that word momentum as one of the single most important words of writing, and certainly finishing a book. And there are just so many things one can do to create momentum, but it can be hard to sustain over the course of writing a whole book, or even writing for a whole month, And definitely with a book, it can take years and years where you'll likely hit the wall with exhaustion or self-doubt at least a few times, maybe a few times a day, a few times a week, if you're me. I learned the power of setting a goal with a deadline when I was Executive Director of National Novel Writing Month for 12 years. And that experience, really has shaped JanYourStory in a lot of different ways. So I want to talk about a few things that I learned about the power of a goal and a deadline, like what they can give you. And one is just this concept that so many people say, I want to write my book someday, but someday tends not to happen. And so this is an invitation to make creativity a priority for just 1 month of the year. Your creativity deserves at least that. And then there's this saying that comes from Chris Baty, who's our guest today, that a goal and a deadline is a creative midwife. And part of the reason for that is that you're focused on progress, not revising. You want to get through and write more every day. And also, like having a goal and deadline, it kind of emphasizes having a streak, showing up every day to write, which is certainly as important as any word count total. And then there's this concept that quantity can actually lead to quality. So, if 500 words is a stretch for you and you're not revising it, you're just moving forward, having that pressure, that creative pressure, can help you take risks and just explore, because writing a memoir is so much about exploring and discovery. And then, as Brooke was saying, with our community, this is a big part of writing, is just this feeling of writing with others. And you get just this, this power, this galvanizing force and this force of accountability, when you're writing with others. So we did one thing differently than NaNoWriMo, or one important thing, and that is that we changed the goal from 50,000 words in a month to just 500 words a day, which we think is more manageable. I hope it is. So, Brooke, I know you participated in at least one NaNoWriMo. So what was that like for you, and did it help or hinder your writing?
Yeah, I was just laughing because I think 500 words a day is much more manageable. I mean, that was one of the biggest things for me that was hard about NaNoWriMo is that those 1700 words were really daunting, and it was hard for me
Mm,
to do in one sitting, whereas 500 words you really can knock out in one sitting and also not even that difficultly. Like it could take a half hour or an hour. So I think it's like a perfect increment of writing. NaNoWriMo, that said, did absolutely help my writing because for me, I was on a deadline. I was trying to finish a book. I mean, I can get very, very foot draggy. I mean, clearly, I think this is a common kind of phenomenon for people who are saying they want to write their memoirs, exactly like you said. And just like, we want to, but we're not making the priority and we need to go time hunting. And so for me, that's what that was. It ended up being majorly about time hunting and just saying, I said I was going to do this. I'm writing this book. And NaNoWriMo was just kind of like an engine to help me do that. So the power of accountability, huge. The other thing was knowing so many people out there were doing the same thing. It was just, there's that vibe, it's almost like you can
hmm
feel it pulsing. It's kind of like a universe thing. It's very hard to quantify or really name, but you can feel it like a pulse, right? Like all these other people are writing. And I think that's so powerful. If you post online about your efforts because you're doing a challenge, people love it. Oh my gosh, if you want validation, do a writing challenge because then you post on social media and people are like, yay, you can do it. It's the most encouraging thing. And I really loved that part of it. And then the power of this kind of commitment, when you're not alone and you're doing it with others, you tend to show up. So those are all the reasons why it was so helpful. Grant, I'm curious, what is your number one tip for success?
Yeah, I observed so many writers over the years and, everybody's wanting help with like how do you structure a novel or tips for characterization, plot, and all that is very important. But I really think in the end, it's about time management, which is kind of an unsexy concept, but it really is so crucial to writing in any form, and especially to finish a book and to make your creativity part of your busy life. And, so many people, I guess, would sign up. Literally, most of our signups for National Novel Writing Month happened the week before, if not days before. And so I think a lot of people said, hey, I'm going to write a novel. It's going to be fun. And what they would find is that they needed to find a way to write for 2 hours every day. And if they hadn't really strategized or figured that out, like time doesn't just happen. We have to make choices on how to use our time. And so that's really what I think NaNoWriMo, like I think it has, and JanYourStory. I hope JanYourStory will have benefits beyond just the words on the page, that it'll be a way for people to really do some self-introspection and some reflection and think about their own behaviors and what they're prioritizing in life and how they can make those priorities true priorities. Because, we know as writers that sometimes we say we want to write a memoir or a book, but we don't really make it happen. And that is our choice, so we have a choice to make it happen. So right back at you, Brooke, what do you think people should do to succeed?
I think that all the things I said above for sure, but I want to just kind of piggyback on a couple of things. Like we do all have busy lives, so I think that this notion of having like a partner in it, someone that you can be accountable to, I love the power of public declarations.
Yeah.
I mentioned that earlier. Like for me, going on social media and saying, I wrote however many words, 1,500 words today. In this case, it will be 500 words, or I'm day 3 into my 31-day challenge. It keeps the momentum going because people are like, oh, you're doing a challenge, and they're loosely tracking you. I mean, more than anything, it's like you have a free cheerleading section. And I think using that to your benefit is an awesome thing to do. And then this accountability thing. I mean, I'm obsessed with accountability because I'm a coach, because I teach classes. I know that people who I coach and people who take my classes, that accountability is at least 50% of the benefit of doing that kind of stuff. And so saying you're going to do it, being accountable to someone bigger than yourself or to a community will get you over the finish line. And then, back to underwatering. I am totally aware that I am just like, oh, I'm letting the memoir wilt. And all I have to do is say, yes, I'm going to do it. And I know that this is just going to give me a giant kickstart, which is its whole purpose in the first place. But every single book I've ever written, I've had a coach, and I don't have a coach for this one. So it's like showing that I'm probably going to need to do that if I want to get over the finish line. So again, accountability, same, for authors I know. So I'm just saying it's not like a unique phenomenon. I know one thing you mentioned, Grant, is that so many people dropped out of NaNoWriMo because they fall so far behind. So what is your take? Like, what should someone do if they're halfway in or even 3/4 of the way in, and then they get sick or they have a big project at work? Like, does that ruin everything, or are they going to be okay?
What happened at NaNoWriMo especially is that, and it was partly because people had to write 1,700 words a day. So if people missed even just a couple days, they felt like it was too much to come back from, to write an extra 3,000 words essentially, with less time to do it. And so we lost a lot of our writers after like day 5. And it was really disappointing for me because, the purpose of the event was to write, and to show up to write. And even though the goal was 50,000 words, it was really like, just make this a priority for a month. And so, one problem with the goal is that it can be deflating. I think that's why some people end up hating New Year's resolutions, is because if you don't reach it, you feel bad about yourself. You feel like a loser. But again, I think people should really just remind themselves that the showing up to write is the important part. And that's why I really want to emphasize streaks. If you can write for 3 days in a row or 5 days in a row, I mean, that is just such a tremendous accomplishment. And I think streaks are more important than word count. And especially because, finishing stuff and that showing up with regularity, not even every day, but just regularity is what's going to get you there. But definitely commitment can flag throughout the months. So, Brooke, commitment definitely flags throughout the month as people get more exhausted, I think. So what do you suggest people do to make sure they can show up every day and keep going, especially through that treacherous zone of the muddy middle? How can people stay committed?
Yeah, the muddy middle is tough, not only because it's like you're slogging through it, but it also can last a long time. Like some people are in the muddy middle for years. So if you have been, don't feel bad about that. It's like you have to find these things to keep re-inspiring yourself. So it's and it's not just busyness or not prioritizing, as we were saying, are two big reasons that people don't get their writing done. There's also real fear. I see this with my writers all the time: fear of outcome, fear of not being as good as, fill in the blank finished memoir that you loved. People are always comparing themselves. And Chris actually speaks to this in the interview today. Fear of exposure. And so we risk a lot when we write memoir. And it's really easy to get out ahead of ourselves and to let all of our ideas about the unknowns be the thing that stops us. And I have certainly dealt with that myself. So I speak from experience, and as well as with all of the writers I've worked with over the years. But recently, Grant, we hosted an open house for Memoir Nation, which was really touching. And it was fun to see all the people who showed up to see what we're doing. And there was someone in there, an author, a She Writes Press author, named Laura Engel, who wrote a book, a She Writes Press book. And I loved that she was encouraging other people. She said, do not wait. She was afraid of so many things and none of her fears came true. And I just thought that was a very inspiring message for her to share with everybody else, because it's like you might be afraid of something that is really never going to come to fruition. And then that is the thing stopping you. And then you only find out like 10 years later, you were scared of something that just never happened. Mm-hmm. So those are my thoughts on that. We do want to share some of the things that we're going to be focusing on in January to help you, our writers, in community, if you choose to join us. So there's going to be regular newsletters and social media content. So please do come check us out. We're really trying to get engagement and excitement around all of this. Daily writing inspiration, including a daily prompt. There are special spaces in the community where you can root each other on and post your daily word count. So the community piece is really important. And the community hub that we have is very cool. It's a great network and place to just interact with people and see who you're writing with. We're going to have regular write-ins via Zoom. And so if you want to write in January, you will have people to write with. And then this little podcast series that we're doing is technically JanYourStory Prep, because it's happening in advance of January, but we're happy that you're here and listening. So Grant, we've got some cool stuff going on.
Yeah, we've got a lot planned for this very first Jan Your Story, and it will continue to evolve. But I think the best thing out of everything we have planned is you. You know, you're part of the galvanizing force of writing with others, and I'm not talking about you, Brooke. I'm talking about you, the community. Um, as you've said, it's all about writing with others in the Memoir Nation community, and that force of writing with others. You know, I've witnessed it as a super powerful force, and it's just so important to cheer each other on, because by cheering others on, I actually think you're creating momentum not only for the group but for yourself. You know, it's a virtuous cycle.
It sure is. So help us spread the word, everyone. If you go to social media, you'll see a bunch of memes. Come check out the website, sign up, invite your friends, show up for each other. If this sounds fun to you, and how can it not, right? I mean, 500 words a day in January. What are we talking about here? It's going to be fun. It's going to be easy. It's going to be motivating. And then at the end of January, you're going to have 15,000 words. And that is just like brilliant. So I am excited. Also can't wait to hear what Chris Baty has to say, because he is, after all, the father of it all. Excited for him. And we'll be back to hear more after this short break.
Welcome back, everybody. I am super excited to introduce Chris Baty, because he's a great writer, a great friend, and one of the most uplifting people on the planet. Chris founded National Novel Writing Month way back in 1999, and it has taught me so much about writing, creativity, the value of a writing community, whimsicality, and even life in general. And so since founding and running NaNoWriMo until 2012, Chris has spent the last decade leading UX writing teams at Figma and Dropbox and teaching classes through Stanford's continuing studies program. And he's currently working on a novel about an assistant librarian trying to return a DVD in post-apocalyptic Canada. He's also the author of the really great writing book, No Plot, No Problem, and also the co-author of Ready, Set, Novel. And I should say that Chris has also been involved with a group of former NaNoWriMo volunteers to put on Nano 2.0 this year, since NaNoWriMo, the nonprofit organization, is sadly no more. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us in the midst of Nano 2, which is happening now, even though this is going to, I think, air in early December. And Chris, this is our first writing challenge that we're putting on naturally, and we are here to glean some of your wisdom for our nation of memoirists who are embarking on our Jan Your Story challenge soon. But first, tell us a bit more about Nano 2 this year, and how you're doing with your own writing this month.
Oh, how am I doing with my own writing? Okay, I'm going to leave that for the end, and maybe we just won't even have time to get to that. So Nano 2.0 is a volunteer-run project, and we're really here just to kind of help support kids and teens and adults who are bashing out a book this November as part of National Novel Writing Month. And it all started this past summer when a lot of us, including you, Grant, who had been involved in NaNoWriMo for a long time in the past, had seen this announcement that NaNoWriMo, the organization, had sadly run out of money and was closing its doors. And I think that was heartbreaking in so many ways. And we started having these conversations about what we could do to support the writers that we knew were going to be showing up, you know, excited to write in November, and find that the sites and all of those great resources were gone. And so now we are a group of 15 volunteers, and we have a site at nano2.org and a blog, and great fun social channels where people can get pep talks and writing tips and find links to communities where they can find those inspiring writing buddies that will kind of help keep them going when the writing gets tough. And we kind of just see this as a chance to reimagine NaNoWriMo in a more like open source model, where NaNoWriMo becomes just sort of a writing event that's like supported by hundreds of groups and projects and organizations, and really owned by none of them. And I think our goal at Nano 2.0 is to really kind of provide a map to all of the amazing things that are still happening in November for writers. And one of the things that we've done is really embrace this idea that NaNoWriMo is for so many other kinds of writing projects besides novels. And so I think that had always been kind of a through line with National Novel Writing Month, but we really are dialing that up. And so we have people who are working on poems, and we have people that are working on screenplays, and we have people who are working on memoirs. So there is a big writing community here, and we're hoping to kind of have this be a year-round thing. So we're excited to learn from you as well.
Exciting, Chris. Well, sometimes it seems like you invented the idea of a goal and a deadline, and you certainly did define it for novel writers in a powerful way. Grant likes to quote your metaphor that a goal and a deadline is a creative midwife. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the magic of a goal and a deadline.
Oh my gosh. I mean, do we do anything without a deadline? I think the answer is no. Are you all familiar with Gretchen Rubin's concept of the four tendencies? Have you talked about this at all in the...
I want to learn.
Yeah. So she has this really interesting theory that the world is divided into four kinds of people, and it breaks down on how you respond to deadlines. And so I think that there are people that are able to kind of like do work without a deadline. And there are approximately like 7 of them in the universe, right? These are the people that turned in work early in school, that are always ahead of things. Are either of you those people?
No,
I don't think so.
we're not.
Thank God. I feel really much more comfortable with you now, because I am not. I exist in the category that is called the obliger. And the obliger is somebody that will move mountains to get something done for somebody else. If somebody else asks me to do it and I commit to it, I will absolutely prioritize that thing and get it done. If I have a self-set deadline that only I care about, I will 100% of the time procrastinate on it and fail to meet that goal. And I think that so many of us, when we head into these creative projects, sadly, we exist in that model that anything that somebody else hands us in the middle of that they're asking for, we will kind of prioritize above it. And so I do think that we can't change the way we are as people, but we can give ourselves a terrifying deadline. And that, I think, is very useful to know that you can build accountability for yourself. And a lot of the time that comes from bringing other people into the writing process. And that's where I think something we often think about book writing, whether that's a novel or a memoir, as this kind of lonely, isolated thing, right? Where you climb up into your writing garret and you spend several years there, and you're writing by candlelight and maybe bleeding a little bit. And then you emerge with this like finished book, right? That is going to wow the world. But in fact, that is for me and other obligers, is a surefire path to us just like watching Netflix for that entire 6-year span. It's like, we're not going to get things done. But if we know that there are other people that we are checking in with, who are writing with us, that we've shared our writing goals with, we are much more likely to get those things done. And I really do think that that's where the magic of a deadline can have a transformative effect on writing projects that I think sometimes we've struggled for a life to do. But somehow when we give ourselves that concrete goal of we're going to do X work in X days, somehow that unlocks the ability to really focus and make progress on it.
That was great. I love that Gretchen Rubin detour, and I'm going to read her now and
Yes.
and also investigate that whole concept of being an obliger. And my question kind of that tees it up really is that one thing that I found inspiring and kind of necessary about NaNoWriMo is just the idea of making creativity a priority for a single month. I think especially the deeper you get into adulthood, creativity tends to fall lower and lower on your to-do list until it's not really there at all. So can you talk a little bit more about that notion of just the value of making creativity, putting it up at the top for like a month?
Yeah. I mean, what a bummer about adulthood, right? Where I think, so I have a 10-year-old son, and he has a laser focused view of what adulthood is going to be like. And it is going to involve unlimited desserts, nonstop video games, staying up late, and probably like getting to skip showers anytime he wants, right? It's like the beautiful vision of adulthood. But
it's my lifestyle.
Yeah. But the truth is, we know this, we are constantly bathing. Like, why do we just are always, it's these routine things that are taking up so much of our time. And I think that as adults, we still I think about my son again, and for him, creative play is still a big part of his life. Like, he loves drawing and coming up with these really whimsical, interesting things. And he can kind of lose himself in that for hours. And it's interesting as adults, I do think that we get so focused on being obligers and meeting other people's needs and taking care of other people that we don't make time for ourselves. And part of that is that I think sometimes mistakenly believe that same spirit of play, of just kind of experimenting, of drawing something, of making up a song, that it's gone, but it's not gone. I mean, if anything, it's even deeper and more important for us as adults. We just make no time to do it. We just don't prioritize it. And there's this idea of kind of creating this month-long space, I think allows us to kind of reopen that door to our own creativity and our own imagination that really kind of, I think, swung closed for a lot of us in adolescence when we started looking around and being like, oh, I look at this other kid who's a great artist, and my cat looks terrible. I can't draw Garfield. Look at the way he draws Garfield. And I'm going to just shut down now. And I feel like that's the path that I think as we move into adulthood, we tend to we stick around in our areas of competence, and we prioritize the things that other people need, which is rarely going to be writing a memoir, right? Or writing a novel or something like that. And there's something really beautiful about that idea that we're going to reconnect with that same spirit of improvisation, and imagination and exploration and following things just to see where they go. And that, I think, is such a reawakening. I know the first time I organized National Novel Writing Month, I was 26. And I just felt like I had stepped into this weird realm that I just didn't know was there. And it was in my own brain, right? This idea of like characters that were doing things and having conversations, and the book kind of taking on a life of its own. And I think that kind of everyday magic of writing, when it gets kind of reintroduced to you as an adult, is so powerful, because it does remind you of that sense of really just losing yourself in your imagination that really sustained us as children.
I was thinking of the word magic while you were talking, and it's so true. I mean, and just having space to do that, because I do think we forget about it, we lose touch with it. And, all those years, NaNoWriMo invited introspection into your creative process. Clearly, you're redoing that too with Nano 2. And it also creates creative conversations with others, which is something that we're excited about with our own challenge. I, over the years, have heard people evangelizing about the benefits of planning versus pantsing. And these are very divided camps. But there's also this new word that's very NaNoWriMo, plantsing, which is planning and pantsing. And so where do you fall on that spectrum? And do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I am probably a plantser. I love plants, houseplants in general. And so how can you not be a plantser? But I think my approach to planning has really changed a lot over time. That first NaNoWriMo back in 1999, I had nothing, and no characters, no sense of story, no setting. I just started writing and followed that voice. And it came out like it was a terrible first draft, but it was a first draft, and it had a beginning, middle, and an end. And it felt amazing. I think the next year I was like, okay, if I plan twice as much, the book will be twice as good. And in fact, that book was absolutely terrible and such a slog to write. And so since then, I've kind of gone back and forth. I actually take a lot of inspiration from something Grant said that I never forget, which is that there's something about this idea of a 30-day writing adventure that really invites experimentation. And it's a powerful thing to do, to challenge your own sense of who you are as a planner or as an improviser. And I think that seeing this as a chance to try something that you feel like you're not can be a really powerful way to write. So if you are somebody who tends to really think about wanting to outline every single passage, right, and know exactly what will be in each chapter and what the arc is, this could be a chance to try to just set that aside and dive in, to really do a discovery draft where you are just letting the kind of story take you where it wants to. I think also if you're somebody that tends to rely on that notion of like, I'll just see where this goes, I think it can be really helpful and eye-opening sometimes to be like, no, I'm going to really sit down and try to think about what are the key milestones in this story? What's going to be the midpoint? Are we going to have a kind of all hope is lost moment the way, most Hollywood movies do about 75% of the way through? And that notion of kind of like either embracing or running from structure, depending on how you've typically done it in the past, I think is pretty wonderful. And it does feel like this is like a real writing lab. It's a chance for you to experiment with like how you write and who you are as a writer.
Well, Chris, you teed up my question perfectly, because I do love how NaNoWriMo challenges the status quo of creative conventions. There's this notion that a very kind of ponderous, thoughtful, slow approach to writing brings about the best writing. And in fact, some of my more literary fiction writers, they could not do NaNoWriMo, or they sort of disdained it, actually. But the pressured writing style of NaNoWriMo, often shows how quantity can ironically bring about quality. So is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been true for me. And I think hearing the stories of, hundreds of thousands of participants over the years. And I think to me, that comes down to this fact that we are writers usually because we were readers first, right? That there's something, that magic, Brooke, that you had mentioned about books is real. There's nothing more amazing and enchanting than a story. And humans are really just wired for it, right? Anytime somebody tells a story, even a boring story about going to the post office, we're like locked in, right? And there's some kind of like neurochemistry behind it about mirror neurons, and that there's something kind of almost evolutionary about the ability to kind of get pulled into this other reality. And so I think that the problem is that because we have read so many books we love, when we sit down to write, even if we've done this before, I think we tend to bring this like debilitatingly high level of expectation for our output. And we do that from the first draft onward. And we kind of assume that the books that we loved really kind of started out as just maybe a slightly lesser version of this final thing that we read. But the truth is that, you know, every book that we really have loved went through this real period of being completely awful. And it was, you know, the threads of the story were all over the place. It was kind of confusing. There are probably giant plot holes in it. The parts that readers eventually resonated with the most probably weren't even in there at the start. But I think because we don't know this, we tend to be so critical with our output, and we kind of think we need to apply that that editor's lens to every sentence as it comes out. And that kind of thing, I think, works really well if you're writing something short, like, you know, an email or, you know, a blog post even. I think you can kind of edit as you go. You use that kind of editing brain. Mm-hmm. But there is an alchemy in long form writing, whether that's fiction or nonfiction. And I think that alchemy really relies on you turning off that inner critic. You stop second guessing every line, and you just let this thing be beautiful and messy and weird. And I think if you are trying to make it perfect from those first lines, you're going to get so frustrated because it never will be. And your natural impulse will be to back away from the project, to think maybe the problem was that I needed a better idea, or it's not this book, it's another book. And that's where I think the kind of impossible, ridiculous deadline is helpful, because you have this inner critic in you that sees that you're attempting to write an entire memoir in 30 days. And it's just like, okay, no, I'm out of here. Like, this is all reason has been lost here. I'm going to go bother somebody else for a little bit. And that's incredibly liberating, because that's when you start to get to that really juicy, weird, interesting, messy, nonlinear stuff that becomes kind of the raw material that you shape in that second draft and that third draft into the book that eventually people will, you know, be clutching their hearts in wonder and delight over.
Love it. We have to ask you about the torturous, muddy middle, you know, the place where so many writing projects go to die. And I am curious, what advice do you have for people when their fingers get stuck in the mud of their books? What shall they do?
Yeah, it's real, you know, and that happens again to everybody. Part of it is just embracing this idea that the books you've loved have also gotten stuck in this swampy morass, right? Where the authors had no idea where to take things and probably started second guessing their entire existence. Some of the techniques that I think I like to use are, I do think sometimes I've just generated so much that it's almost like the signal to noise ratio has really tilted towards noise, and I've lost track of like, what was this whole thing about? And I think it can be nice to pause and go back to the last place in your story that you felt confident. It's like, oh yeah, this was the voice that I was going for. This was kind of the feel that I wanted. And then start back out again from there, I think can be really useful. But you know, the real answer, and this is such a frustrating and disappointing answer because it feels so pat and it is always the answer, is really just sitting down and doing more writing. So I think the difference between despondence and elation as a writer when it comes to whatever project you're working on is often just 500 to 1,000 words on the page, right? When you are feeling stuck or feeling like you have lost the juice of this, or that this is a hopeless endeavor, there is just something about getting that momentum going again that can be such a game changer. And I really do think that, like, it's interesting because we have these big book projects and they feel like such a creative, very right brain, you know, it's kind of like impossible to define. There is a lot of magic, you know, alchemy to it. But I think that they pair super well with these really rigorous left brain linear things like setting daily word count goals and thinking about the physics and the momentum of a project. Because to me, like, momentum is everything, especially when you get to the middle. And I think Isaac Newton, who I think of as kind of my like writing guru, really had this idea that, you know, objects at rest tend to stay at rest and objects in motion tend to stay at motion. And that's that's so true with writing. I mean, we all know that feeling of like when you're writing regularly and you're spending time in these worlds that you've created, everything is fresh. It's all alive to you. And you're in the shower and having ideas. You're going to bed at night and you're having ideas. You're out on walks and you're having ideas. And it's because you are in motion, right? You have momentum on that project. And I think when we take a few days break from our project or even longer, I think that's when that momentum stops and it can start to feel impossible to get started again. But the truth is like literally a couple words can do it. We just interviewed a writer named Rachel Herron, who's amazing on our blog. And she talked about this 2-word project that she gives herself where every morning she forces herself to put in a word or take out a word from her manuscript. And that's the only expectation. But she always finds that kind of breaks the seal of the page and gets those ideas flowing again. And I do think that when you're feeling kind of despondent or you're feeling lost in the middle, just knowing that oftentimes that can be an issue with your momentum and that there is a rock solid way to get that momentum machine going again. And it's just giving yourself this goal of, I'm going to write 20 words right now, or I'm going to write 500 words, whatever it is. And you get going and then that thing starts to open up again. The rust falls away and you're off and going.
Well, Chris, one of your lines in No Plot, No Problem that I've repeated a lot is that if you want to get something done, ask a busy person to do it, which I love. And I think it's true. But yet I remember when I would invite people to do NaNoWriMo, especially, I would get a lot of resistance because people said, I don't have the time. I'm too busy. And, busyness is oftentimes a perception, but it's oftentimes a reality, so there can be external forces like a busy work life or a busy family life. So what's your advice to those people who are smothered by this horrible adulthood that prevents them from being creative?
Yeah, they're just bathing too often. I think that's really the problem. Yeah. I mean, I think it's real that we have a lot going on. And I do think, though, that even though we will never have time to write a memoir or have time to write a novel, we can always make time to write a memoir or write a novel. And I think that a lot of times that requires us to lean on our support networks more than maybe we typically feel comfortable with. And I think about that for parents, is that if you have a kind of young kid at home, you do have certain obligations to keep them alive. And I think legally that's true. It's probably written somewhere in the state of California, federal laws. And I think that thinking about ways that you can kind of create this writing retreat for yourself in the middle of your everyday life is really powerful, because that's the way we're going to end up probably writing. Very few of us are going to become independently wealthy and be able to fund this lavish lifestyle of just, taking cruises around the world and writing on islands. That we are going to create in the middle of this kind of pressure cooker of day-to-day responsibilities. But I think that's all the more reason to really lean into that and figure out, how do I carve out these meaningful spaces? And a lot of times it takes less time than you think. And one of the things we see in National Novel Writing Month is that people really get a lot done. Oftentimes, like right when they wake up in the morning, they're going to do 25 minutes. And then on their lunch break, they're going to do 25 minutes. And then right before they go to bed, they're going to do another 45 minutes. And that's actually can add up to a pretty tremendous amount of words that you're fitting in these daily pockets. I would say if you can, again, this is just thinking about this for a month. If you can kind of make some deals, if you have a partner where you kind of take some of the chores off your plate just for that month and you can do double chores afterwards, or you think about kind of work, are there ways that you could kind of rearrange your work schedule so that you have time to write in that, what I call the greenhouse window? And the greenhouse window is just that time when we're most alive and awake and alert and creative. And for me, it's really in the morning, right after that first cup of coffee goes in, I've got this 2-hour window where anything I put in there is going to bloom. And unfortunately, the thing I usually put in there is work stuff.
Exactly.
So I think trying for a month to really think about that as your prize window, where you put this memoir project and those 500 words are going to happen there, I guarantee they will go so much easier and the quality of it will be so much better. But also know that you can write when you're tired, and that sometimes it's okay to kind of embrace that notion that you're going to write when it doesn't feel good. You're going to write when you don't have ideas, because again, that's when that momentum machine just starts whirring to life. And I think once you start writing, you just keep going.
Yeah, no, I'm already feeling inspired. You guys, I'm ready to do this. It's great. And, I wanted to say the word whimsy and whimsicality have come up in the interview a few times already. And it's really the signature of NaNoWriMo. This whole notion that making writing fun is the way forward is fabulous. And so could you tell us more about how and why you decided to make NaNoWriMo into such a fun event? And we certainly want to replicate that spirit of fun for JanYourStory.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just came out of the fact that I had no idea what I was doing and was deeply, deeply terrified about the whole endeavor. When it started, I really revered books and novels, but I had really a strong sense I was not cut out to do this. And so I think that embracing that idea early was helpful, where I was like, okay, we're gonna write lengthy yet terrible books, and that's going to be our goal. And somehow that felt a little bit like I don't know, it was almost like a shield that would protect us from our own self-doubt, where we kind of embraced the silliness of it and the fact that this maybe was going to result in something we would never want to look at again and would back quietly away from. But I think that sense of kind of fun and adventuresomeness and experimentation, it was definitely not the norm. I mean, I think back when NaNoWriMo started, I do remember it as people started finding out about it, it definitely got a lot of criticism as this idea that it was kind of desecrating literature, right? It just wasn't taking things seriously enough. But I couldn't help but notice that both I and the people that were doing it were actually writing books that we never would have otherwise, that were actually like pretty reasonably unhorrible books. And they were coming out of this process of lowering the pressure on ourselves and really dialing up that sense of it kind of anything goes fun. And I do think for me, that is like the ideal environment to be creating, right? One where, you aren't putting all of this heavy weight on yourself to create some kind of deathless masterwork, right? Really, you're just there to show up and kind of see what's waiting for you on the page and kind of push open that door to your imagination and step through it.
Love it. So exciting. Well, thank you for all this inspiration, Chris, and thanks for bringing your wisdom and all the hard-earned, time that you put in to this interview, because it means something to us.
I cannot wait to see how it goes in January. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
Chris, this has revolutionized my writing life. All of your advice and your inspiration. I think I finally got it.
Oh, so, good. Yeah. Good, Grant.
So thank you.
You're so welcome. Well, you are both inspirations to me as well. Keep me posted. I can't wait to read your memoirs.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Brooke, I've heard Chris speak many, many times, and I'm consistently and astoundingly inspired every time I talk with him. Are you ready to sign up for Nano 2.0 and JanYourStory? I just might be.
That is a good question. Nano 2.0 next year,
okay.
Right? And JanYourStory immediately in front of us. I totally agree with you. I love how Chris can make an ordinary concept like having a goal and a deadline and make it so creative. He's always so fun. And then who would have guessed that in 1999, a guy living in a studio apartment in San Francisco would plant the seed of this writing event, and hundreds of thousands of people would write novels in a month. And now, Grant, he's kind of passing the torch to you for memoir, which I just find really touching.
It is touching. Chris is the best in so many different ways, and I wouldn't be the person I am without him. And NaNoWriMo was just definitely a wild phenomena, and that is largely because of Chris, his undefinable Chrisness, just kind of makes that happen. And we hope to replicate it on some level with Memoir Nation. So we're extending a special invitation to you all to make history, to participate in the very first Memoir Nation. And we're making some merchandise to commemorate the special occasion, but the main commemorating of the event will be the memoir you write. So go to JanYourStory, the JanYourStory tab on the memoirnation.com website, and please sign up.
And we're going to continue to have special guests all this month on the podcast to help you get ready to write this January. We're going to be talking about community and time management. This stuff maybe sounds like less interesting maybe than some of our themes, but I guarantee you it is all in service of your writing. And actually, when I listen to these kinds of interviews, I'm always like, wow, I take such deep kernels of inspiration. So please keep tuning in. Get ready to write your story in January, 500 words. If you're on the fence about it, just come check it out. There's literally nothing to lose. It's free. You're going to see some people in there. You're going to see a community that you're going to want to join. There are special activities and, importantly, Grant, a party at the end. So
I'm ready for it already, but especially after writing for a month.
Yeah, we'll see you all next week, and thanks.